All right, would you open your Bibles? Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. We're going to deal with the Ten Commandments and probably, move on beyond there. I'm prepared to move farther than that, but we'll take as much time as you would like, need on the Ten Commandments. Certainly this is one of the most important passages in all of the Torah. Exodus 20. If you're new with us, everybody looks pretty familiar to me, but if perchance you're new with us today, what we're doing is going through the whole Bible, but not every verse, every chapter. We're dealing with the greatest stories in the Bible. And I'll point out to you right after we get through the Ten Commandments today that we believe the passages immediately following were added hundreds of years after the Ten Commandments were first written down as we have them. Remember, we're still dealing in the Torah with 4 different sources. The J source, the E source, the D source, the P source. And those priests filled in a lot of material between the oldest of the stories. And I personally, and lots of other scholars far greater than I, believe that the wonderful, rich stories were the ones that had been told for hundreds of years around campfires. And then lots of details were added. For example, you'll see right after the Ten Commandments that there's a lot of expository material. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean? But the what does it mean part, we think, came hundreds of years later. The priest added those. Doesn't mean they're unimportant, but not as important to you and me. Not as important. We're looking for those things that are the oldest and most profound statements about God and about us. How God initiates possible right relationship with Him, and how if we respond appropriately, we can know ourselves rightly related to God. Forgiven, set right. And how we can know ourselves rightly related to each other as well. Okay? Let's pray. God, we thank you that the storm has gone. We're grateful that good work by PSO and others and your providential hand kept us from having great power outages this time. We're really grateful for that. That most of our people here in the Tulsa area were still warm even in the height of the storm. We pray for those who do not have power still today, that those who are working to restore it will work with great expediency, with great knowledge, and that all will have heat again as soon as possible. We pray your blessing upon us now as we open this book of yours and trust that you will guide and direct us. We want to understand what you have to say to us, and we know that without your inspiration and guidance, we will not understand all that we ought. So we offer our best efforts in the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus. Amen. Okay, quick reminder. Moses escaped Egypt, left Egypt because he had killed an Egyptian one day who was mistreating an Israeli, and he had fled, eventually making his way all the way to the Sinai Desert. Dead Sea here. So south and west, the Negev, south and east, the Sinai. And he ended up one day after he's married and a father looking after sheep and goats and sees a burning bush not being consumed by the fire. And a voice, I think, deep in his heart saying, I want you to go back to Egypt. I've heard the cries of my people. And so after 430 years of enslavement under the Egyptian kings that we know as pharaohs, God delivered plague upon them until Pharaoh finally, by Moses and Aaron's insistence, this is God doing this to you. He wants His people to be free. The people were allowed to go free. So they moved in stages, the Bible says, in stages, and finally came back to the mountain where Moses had this life-changing experience of God speaking to his deepest heart, sending him back to Egypt. And now Moses' big job, of course, is how do you build a community of people who've been slaves for 400 years? Now think about it. It doesn't mean that they had forgotten God. It doesn't mean that mothers and fathers had quit teaching their children, but the supreme authority over them had been the Egyptian king, Pharaoh. It was he and those who worked under him who had told them how many brick they had to make every day and how much straw to put in the brick. That is, when to get up, when to go to bed, how much straw in the brick. And suddenly they're free. So how will they behave now that they're free? Think back to 1989, 21 years ago. 21 years ago, under the domination of the Soviet Union, folks in Bosnia-Herzegovina had lived next door to each other. Sons and daughters of various groups had intermarried, Muslim kids marrying Christian kids. And suddenly, the strong hand of the Soviet Union was gone, and neighbors started killing neighbor. They started killing neighbors. There was a war. Suddenly it was Muslim against Christian, Christian against Muslim. Sometimes Western Christian against Eastern Christian. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. When there's been a strong, oppressive hand. Dr. Marlon Levenhar is our pastor at All Souls Unitarian Church here. I've gotten to know Marlon better and better, and I like him more every time I'm around him. He's a really bright, capable graduate of Harvard Divinity School. Before he got married and sort of settled down, he decided he'd try to ride a bicycle around the world. Don't know if you've read any of his stories. He'd ride a bicycle around the world. And part of that time he had a friend along with him, and part of that time he was alone. And I've asked him, what was that like when you went through some of these really oppressive countries? When he rode across Syria and Iraq before the present war there. What was that like? And he said, strangely enough, I was safer in those oppressive countries than I was in the democratic ones. I said, really? He said, oh, of course. He said, in Syria, if somebody steals something, cut off your hand. If you hurt somebody, they kill you. They stone you to death or cut off your head. So folks aren't likely to bother you when the penalties are so severe. When the penalties aren't so severe, they'll take your bicycle, they'll take your money, they'll club you in the head, whatever. Sad, true. Okay, all I'm trying to do is tell you what a big job Moses had. The authority had been the king of Egypt. And all those charioteers, those men trained with bows and arrows, and suddenly they're free. So how will they behave once they're free? With no oppressive hand. Moses has no army. Aaron has no army. They cannot coerce these people into doing anything. They'll have to convince them. Convince them that what they're trying to say is right. So Moses has a big job. And he consecrates the people. You remember from last Sunday, he consecrates them. That is, sets them apart and says, you wait here at the bottom of the hill. I'm going to go up and struggle with God about this. It takes him 40 days and nights. And the product of that 40-day and night visit, chapter 20. Let's take a look. Chapter 20. Then God spoke all these words. Now note here that God translates the oldest name the Jews had for God. El, or Elohim, not the name given at the burning bush. So Moses has come back to the mountain where he heard the name deep in his heart. I am who I am. Get on the road to Egypt. And he reverts to the name that they had known for hundreds of years. El, Elohim. Elohim spoke all these words. Number 1 is in verse 2. I am, you know the name, Eye, Asher, Eye. I am who I am, your Elohim. And it ought to be fresh on these people's minds that I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other Elohim before me. Okay, stop a second. Did they have other gods? You betcha. You betcha. We're learning more and more as there are greater numbers of excavations in Israel. And Israel is continuing to excavate as soon as they have resources. but they have political problems and financial problems like all the countries of the world. And so they have to use the resources that are available to them. Sometimes it's great American universities who send professors and archaeological students to these digs with, of course, proper permission to enter into the digs. I've told you on past occasions that if you come over from Jerusalem here to the Mediterranean, it's almost a straight shot west, you come to Caesarea, named obviously for Caesar. Caesarea, the place where Pontius Pilate lived. There is a pedestal, monument that was unearthed there that describes the reign of the governor Pontius Pilate. It's now been put in the museum, but there is a replica of it there right at the beach. There's a Roman theater there when the Romans were in control under Pilate and others. Romans loved a good show, and that theater, made out of stone, is still there. The Romans had built an aqueduct system from the hills, which come down through the center of their country, from the hills to bring fresh water down to the banks of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay. An archaeological group from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, dug and dug at Caesarea with all the proper permits and so on, and came down to a black, burned level that could be carbon dated all the way back to the 8th century before the Common Era, when the Assyrians invaded the 10 northern tribes, raped, plundered, assimilated them into their culture, and that burned level has been preserved for 2,800 years. And SMU found that. Okay, so all I'm saying is Harvard and Princeton and Yale and all these places, they bring archaeological teams and they dig. One of the most dramatic digs that I've seen take place in 25 years that we've gone is at Bet Shean. Bet Shean's right over near the Jordan River, north of Jericho. It's the place where King Saul was defeated by the Philistines, and his body and the body of 2 sons, Jonathan, one of them, whom David loved so much, best friend, nailed to the wall at Bet Shean. It was still a viable community when the Romans held sway over this territory. It had a cardia, we get the word cardiologist and so on from this Roman word, the Latin word for heart. And so the main street was called the Cardia, the heart of the city. And the Romans had such a main street, the Cardia in Bet Shean, and they brought marble from other parts of the empire there and set up beautiful columns in Bet Shean. This is a major fault line. The Jordan River flows right down a major fault line, and there was a terrible earthquake hundreds of years ago, and Bet Shean tumbled. Winds blew the dust over the ruins, and it was covered up for hundreds of years. And about 20 years ago now, the Israelis discovered that they had more violin players from Russia than they needed in the orchestra, and they put the violin players on the top of that hill with capable archaeologists and started digging down. And Bet Shean has been largely unearthed in the last 20 years. And those Roman columns set up, you can see the Cardia, you can see where the main street was and so on. Okay. So these digs continue here. The point is this. As archaeologists have dug down in various places in modern-day Israel, they find alongside religious objects of the one true God, they find also little gods of fertility. Calves, bulls, and so on. Symbols of fertility. Right alongside those gods. Until In every dig, and again, I tell you that Missioner did a great job with his book, The Source, and he based the source on the digs at Bethel and Ai. Those two digs were just a few miles apart, and those digs were occurring in the 50s and early 60s, and so James Missioner went there and took careful notes as they dug down, and then, of course, as you know, if you've read Missioner's books, he starts at the bottom of the hole and rebuilds the story to the modern day. And that's what he does in The Source. So what I'm telling you is that when they dug down, they found that alongside religious objects of their one true God were religious objects of the old gods and goddesses of fertility until 587, 586. When the Babylonians came and surrounded Jerusalem, laid siege to the city, stripped the temple of all of its beauty, stripped the palace of all of its beauty, set fire to both, tumbled down the walls, burned the gates of the city off their hinges so that it was vulnerable to anybody and everybody. When they finally got home again, there are no more gods of fertility. It changed the people of Israel. It changed them. The great prophets who endured in Babylon and kept challenging the people. We must not become Babylonians. We must not become Babylonians the way all of our cousins became Assyrians 200 years ago. We must not let that happen to us. We must be a distinctive people. And to be a distinctive people, you've got to get rid of all these old gods of fertility. And they did. So, even though we had this commandment somewhere around the year 1200, they don't get too serious about it for 600 years. They didn't get it right for 600 years. But it's commandment number 1. You shall have no other gods. Okay, the second commandment's in verse 4. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters under the earth. Don't know how many of you have been to great mosques, even the one here in Tulsa. There are really magnificent mosques, very old ones in various parts of the world. In Istanbul, the church that was St. Sophia was made into a mosque after the Ottoman Turks took that city in 1453, when the Ottoman Turks came, and they turned it into a mosque. Okay. In these mosques, you will discover there is no representation of anything that's ever been alive. Not even plants. That the Muslims got this commandment very clearly, and that is, you shall not represent God in any way that makes God less than God. So in great mosques around the world, they use only geometric patterns. In the walls, in the windows, in the ceilings, circles, triangles, trapezoids. Nothing that's ever been alive. Nothing. If you go out to the Peace Academy here, and there are times during the year you're invited to go, to various services that take place, or they have guided tour events that can be set up, and you will notice only geometric patterns, no representation of anything that's ever been alive, as it were. Okay, so the Jews had this as one of their commandments. And sometimes they did it really well, sometimes not. Now, tonight, if you go to the Knippa lecture, 7 o'clock at Grace Lutheran Church, we have the opportunity to hear the first Eastern Orthodox speaker in the series. In the more than 20 years now, we've been having the Knippa series. Never before had we had an Eastern Orthodox speaker. So 2 years ago, we decided to rectify that and started looking for the best one we could find. And we turned to our friend here at the Greek Orthodox Church, Father Bill Christ, and he said, I would recommend Thomas Hopko. And here was Dr. Tabernet from Phillips Theological Seminary said, I know him. I served with him on the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches in Geneva 25 years ago. He's a great one. I'd recommend him too. Thomas Hopko is an American, but Russian origin. His family, Russian Orthodox Christians. And he went to St. Vladimir Seminary and in time became... he was a monk for a time, was a monk for some years, and then went back to St. Vladimir's to become the dean, retired from there, and is now Dean Emeritus of St. Vladimir's up in New England. He's going to be here tonight at 7 o'clock. I mean, not here, at Grace Lutheran Church, to speak to us. And he's going to talk about that very first chapter of Genesis. In Eastern Orthodoxy, what does it mean to say that humans are created in the image of God? And one of the big problems between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics was the artwork of each. The artwork of each. In Roman Catholic churches, you have three-dimensional representations of Jesus. A three-dimensional body hanging on a cross. With blood coming from the side and the nail prints and hands and feet and so on, and coming from the crown of thorns. A three-dimensional representation. We Protestants said, no, that's not the way. You can't do that. And so we have crosses, but we don't have bodies hanging on them in the Protestant church. In Eastern Orthodoxy, they don't go with three-dimensional representation. They go with iconography. Iconography. Paintings, mosaics, both. Mosaics lasted even longer. Some of you who study art and love art probably know that the paint mixture that has lasted best over the years was made with egg. Egg tempura. Mixing egg with the paint caused them to last longer. And so some of the great paintings of well over 1,000 years have survived with this egg tempura. Mosaics tend to last very well also. In Israel now you can see mosaics dating back to Jesus' own time. The bigger community just outside Nazareth where he grew up, beautiful mosaics have now been unearthed 2,000 years old. Mosaics last a long time. So the Greeks used paintings and mosaics, but in one-dimensional, not three-dimensional like the Roman Catholics. So the Catholics and Protestants put down the iconography of the Eastern Church for a long, long time, and Protestants put down the three-dimensional representations in Roman Catholicism, and we fought over that for centuries. If we have a really genuine appreciation of what each is trying to say, and if we're all very careful that we're not worshiping these objects, that they are just representations of that which is truly real, genuine. And when you hear Father Bill Christ and others talk about their icons, and every Eastern Orthodox church to be authentic must have at least 6 icons. The Holy Mother, Jesus, and the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can have more, you got to have at least 6. Mary, Jesus, the 4 evangelists who told the story. Okay. Magnificent. We've had the privilege of seeing them in Greece. We've had the privilege of seeing them in Russia. The beautiful iconography right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Cathedral Church in Houston has beautiful icons as well. In places like Sicily, from where Gail's grandparents came, the Eastern Christians conquered Sicily at one point many centuries ago. And so you have the beautiful Pantocrator mosaics in Sicily as well, and Palermo and other parts of that country. So what we have to be really careful about is that we not create anything that takes the place of God. I've told you this simple little story, but I was surprised at myself. When my brother, he and my sister and I were all at SMU at the same time. Our parents' great dream was that we would all go to SMU. They had never even seen SMU. But they knew it was Methodist and it was big, and that meant it was good as far as they were concerned. If it was big and Methodist, it had to be good. And so they just said, when you get to SMU. And lo and behold, we were all there at one time. I was in graduate school at the School of Theology, and my sister and brother were both in undergraduate school. My brother, I couldn't believe when he said to our little draft board, right in the height of the Vietnam War, okay, I'm ready to serve. And he went to Vietnam. And, we just knew he would be killed. I mean, we were horrified that he was going to Vietnam at the height of the fighting. Gail and I went to a religious jewelry store, there in Houston, and bought a chain and a little fleur-de-lis cross and gave it to him. And he put it around his neck. And we all went to the airport and saw him off. He was there in the Big Tet Offensive in early 1968. He was there in 67, 68. He was with the 4th Infantry, marched up and down those valleys every day, taking casualties. Sometimes we would get 3 or 4 letters at one time, and then we would hear nothing for a couple of weeks. And one of his letters to us said, somehow in the jungle the other night, my chain must have broken. I cannot find the cross and chain. I was scared to death. For a moment I thought, my goodness, he's there in this demilitarized zone without his cross and chain. And then I said, wait. What am I saying? That God is not loving him as much or is concerned about him. And I didn't mean that all good people and all praying people came home alive. I'm not saying that either, of course. Wonderful good people who had lots of others praying for them died in Vietnam. I'm not saying that, but I'm simply saying that for a moment there, the object seemed to be protecting him. And I had to remind myself, no. This little cross and chain were just symbols of his faith and ours. Symbols of our faith, not faith in this little beautiful cross and chain. We went and bought him another one and sent it, but we didn't really believe that the symbol itself was what we were counting on. So that's what this commandment's all about. You can go on and on and on about that, but basically don't make anything, create anything that becomes so beautiful, so meaningful that you're worshiping it rather than that which it represents. Okay, the 3rd commandment's in verse 7. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Now think about this one. Here again it spells out both the name given to Moses at the burning bush, translated Lord, and the older name they had for God, Elohim. So you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the I am who I am, your Elohim. If you go to Temple Israel, if you go to Congregation B'nai Amunah here in Tulsa, a whole year, every Friday night, you would not hear either one of the rabbis, nor any layperson in either of those houses of worship use the name. They don't use the name, because to use it might be to misuse it. They use substitutes. When we got ready to have our big mosaics in the Great Hall, first depicted in painting and then sent to Venice in Italy and made, I know that we invite Jewish people to come to worship with us if they want. We have a number of couples in our church, one of whom is a Jew, one is a Christian. And I've said to all of them whom I know in that situation, I hope your wife will come with you. Your husband will come with you. I promise, as long as I'm the pastor here, nothing will happen that will embarrass them, put them down in any way, as long as I'm the pastor here. And so a number of them do come. And I knew that if they walked in after the mosaics are on the wall and we had the name, that would be offensive to them. So what I asked was, Rabbi Sherman, will you write the substitute? And the substitute, which is okay to write, is Adonai. Adonai. And so in Hebrew, that's what you have in the north mosaic, in the radiating circles, in gold. In Hebrew, you have Adonai, which all Jews know is the substitute for the I am who I am. We had a national gathering here of people who love Art Deco. And there was a dinner in the Great Hall where people could be surrounded by some of this artwork. And Gail and I ended up being seated with a Jewish couple from Los Angeles. And the woman said, when I came up your stairway, turned that corner and saw the mosaic in the north end, I wept. That in a Christian church, you had had the sensitivity to put the substitute for the name that means so much to all of us. Okay? So it's a matter of sensitivity. In Christianity, I wish we had this kind of reverence for the name. Gail and I went to see Legally Blonde. It's a fun enough show. But the first number, we were, almost ready to leave. It's supposed to be, a parody of sorority girls. But you know what the song was? Oh my God, 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 oh my God. That's offensive to me. It's offensive to me. I don't like it. It's amazing how many times something wonderful happens to people or something terrible happens to people and everything. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. This commandment says you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to use the name in an improper way. And certainly you don't have the right to use God's name to damn someone whom God counts as one of His children, whom He still cares about, still loves. You go to a football game, you go to a basketball game, some 19-year-old kid misses a free throw and you hear people say, Jesus Christ. It's not right. It's not right. And I've told you that when Pope John Paul II came to this country for the first time, and he was so popular and such great crowds wanted to see him and celebrate Mass with him, where he was the celebrant, they had them in big football stadiums and baseball parks around the country. And I said, I always loved it when the Pope was handed the little incense pot. And he walked around, like this. And he's going, because they're driving back all the evil in the place. All those thousands of people who've been there screaming, Jesus Christ, oh my God, oh my God. Cleaning up the place so that you can have church in this football arena. I think you and I need to rethink this commandment. To use God's name and misuse God's name so often that it really means nothing to most people. I realize that, and Gail realized that whoever composed that first song for Legally Blonde, it was no big deal to them. It was a big deal to us. Didn't appreciate. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Anyway, Fourth Commandment's verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And holy, it translates a Hebrew word that means set apart. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, not on the Sabbath. Now here, of course, you get Jews who interpret this in lots of different ways. Jews do not all agree, as Christians do not all agree. Rabbi Sherman is rabbi of our Reformed temple here in Tulsa. And so Friday, when the sun goes down, is very special to him and Nancy and their family. I mean, they flew all the way to New York this week to be there for the circumcision of their fourth grandchild. Their daughter Ruth has had her first baby, Ruth and her husband, and they wanted to be there when this little boy was circumcised on that 8th day. The rabbi chairs our Knippa lecture committee, so they had to hurry back because he wanted to be here tonight for Father Hopko. They flew all the way to New Jersey. So, and I talked with him after they got back and said, "How was it?" And he said, "Oh, it was wonderful, of course, to hold this precious baby in your arms and to see him welcomed into the covenant family." That's what the rabbi said. Welcome him into the covenant family. So, very important. I'm telling you, Rabbi Charles Sherman and Nancy take Judaism very seriously, but this part about working, they drive their car to the temple on Friday night and they drive home again. Not Fitzerman. Rabbi Fitzerman rides a bicycle. Now you might say, well, that's more work than driving a car. In his own mind, it's different. In his own mind, it's different. You do it the simpler way, and a bicycle somehow is simpler than cranking an automobile. So from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, Rabbi Mark Fitzerman drives no car. He doesn't go any farther than you can go on a bicycle. To B'nai Emunah, home again, and so on. But the Orthodox, of course, they don't even want to have to push an elevator button. They take it that far. And I told you, now that little minority group in Israel, I hope, I forget which groups I've described this to. I think most people from America that go to Israel assume that all Jews in Israel are observant. Fewer than half are observant. The majority of Israelis go to the beach on Saturday. They play in the water. They barbecue. They do whatever. They don't go to the synagogue. The reason you hear about the Orthodox, the Hasidim in particular, is that Israel has so many political parties that it's impossible so far for one of them to get a majority. In any election, no party in Israel commands a majority. So for anybody to set up the government, he or she has to negotiate with all the other groups. And there are just enough of those ultra-conservative religious folk who can sway an election by moving their 3 or 4 seats one way or the other. And to do that, they demand concessions. And so for years in Israel, all that was required was that every hotel in all of Israel devote one elevator every Friday at sundown till Saturday at sundown to be the Sabbath elevator. And that elevator would be turned so that it would stop at every floor going up and every floor going down. You didn't have to push a button. Well, in the most recent elections, it was so tight. Could anybody form a government out of those election results that they won a greater concession? Every elevator in every hotel on the Sabbath has to stop at every floor. So all I'm saying is they're still fighting over what it means to observe the Sabbath. When we've been in Israel, I and our 2 sons were runners. And I knew there are different neighborhoods in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Haifa and so on. And so I would ask the guide, is it okay if we run on Saturday also? Yes. But don't go that way. Go this way. And so you got more than half the city you can run in and nobody cares. You may see them jogging, riding bikes, swimming, barbecuing in the backyard. But don't go that way. They won't hurt you, but they may pick up a handful of gravel and throw it at you, that you are working on their Sabbath in their neighborhoods. Okay, all I'm saying here is you and I have seen the transition in our own country. When I was a boy in Texas, we had blue laws, they were called. And you could not buy and sell on Sunday. Finally, it got to the point that pharmacies could sell prescription drugs. Well, what about other stores that sell medicines? Well, okay, so you could go to that counter and buy something, but you couldn't go to pots and pans and buy them. Not on Sunday. It wasn't the Jewish Sabbath, of course, Friday, sundown to Saturday, sundown. It was the Christian Sabbath. On Sunday, you couldn't do that. Bishop William Willimon, former dean of the chapel at Duke, now bishop in Alabama, said in one of his books, America changed Sunday afternoon in 1956 when the movie theater in Greenville, South Carolina opened on Sunday afternoon. Did it ever? I never dreamed my little grandsons would be asked to play Little League baseball on Sunday. They are. Trey and Allison have agreed so far their boys will not play on Sunday morning. They can play afternoon, not on Sunday morning. But gymnast groups, Sunday morning. Soccer tends to be more of an other than United States sport, and so the soccer leagues were some of the first here in Tulsa. They do anything and everything on Sunday morning. Could not care less that it's Sunday. All of which means America has moved to a point where nobody is taking care of your and my Sunday. Nobody. OSU will play basketball at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning if the money's right. So will OU, so will Tulsa. If television will put them on at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, they'll play basketball. Now, I say that we have some OSU season ticket holders who normally worship at 11, who come at 8:30 and then drive to Stillwater for the game. They do come at 8:30, but not all of them, of course. This is not putting them down. I'm sure SMU will play at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. If they ever beat enough people, somebody would pay them to be on. I'm just saying America's changed. It's changed. Nobody's taking care of our Sunday anymore. Nobody's taking care of our Sunday. So it's going to be more and more difficult for us to figure out. Dr. Charles Allen used to say that when he was a Methodist preacher's son, and of course Dr. Allen was born way back there in 1915, so he was a little boy, in the late 20s, and he said his father was severely criticized in little small communities where he was a pastor when he let his children play baseball in the backyard on Sundays. Sunday afternoon, not Sunday morning, of course. Sunday afternoon. Severely criticized that he let them play baseball on Sunday afternoon. Well, the Jews believe, I'm talking about observant Jews believe something very special takes place when the sun goes down on Friday. And you're supposed to rush to your homes and have the appropriate candle lighting, the breaking of a beautiful loaf of bread, usually whoever is the chef, the cook at the house. Of course, nowadays they can buy it in all the better bakeries. But buy this beautiful loaf of bread. You've seen it where the dough is sort of woven looking. It's a beautiful, beautiful loaf of bread when possible. And they have the bread and the lighting of the candles, and they wave their hands and say the prayers, over the bread. It's beautiful. What it means to have a set-apart time. This commandment is about a set-apart time. Do you have a set-apart time when you're not thinking about working? When you're thinking about God. Think about the word recreation. It first was a hyphenated word. Recreation. What does it take for you to be recreated? To be reminded that God's breath still enters your lungs, exits your lungs. God's breath. God breathed into the breath of life. It's a gift from God. What does it mean for you to be reminded at least every seventh day that everything you have is a gift of God, even breath itself? That's what this commandment's all about. And so various people interpret it different ways. What do we have to do? What can we not do? And so on. But that's what it's about. Fifth commandment's in verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord, there's again this beautiful way of saying it, so that the I am who I am, your Elohim, is giving to you. I've told you that the Jews here in our community do something really wonderful for us Gentile clergy. Now, it's the same usual suspects who show up, of course. The more conservative Christian groups, more conservative Christian Methodist congregation pastors don't show up. But you can tell very, very quickly at this once-a-year event which Methodist preachers think Jews' covenant has never been revoked. I can tell you 4 or 5 Methodist churches in this city that still thinks God loves Jews and hasn't revoked their covenant. And the other Methodist preachers don't come, even though they're all invited. You can tell which Presbyterians show up and which don't. 0 now. Bill Wiseman always came. How many Baptists? 0 now. Warren Hultgren always came, and so on. The Jews bring to this city every year one of the really great Jewish scholars in America. And now, of course, they have as many women as men because they have great women scholars as we do, who now are heads of seminaries and professors of seminaries. The one this year was an outstanding young woman who's head of the Jewish seminary in Los Angeles. But the point I'm coming to here is that one year, one of those speakers, this speaker is brought in, and the money for the Monday presentation was given by a Jewish physician in the city for many years named Dr. Lubin. Dr. Lubin and his wife gave the money for the Gentiles to get to hear the speaker. And so the speaker comes in and speaks to the Jewish community on Friday night and Saturday morning, to the Jewish Sunday school. They do have a Sunday school on Sunday morning. And then on Monday, Christian clergy get to come and hear the speaker. And they feed us a free lunch. And we hear the person again immediately after lunch, right there in the dining room. So a speech, a lunch, a speech again. And one of the speakers a few years ago talked about the 10 Commandments. And it was very interesting to hear this great Jewish scholar talk about the 10 Commandments. When he got to this one, about honoring your father and your mother, and it was a man that year, when he got to this one, he said, now this certainly is about respecting one's parents. But we know that not all mothers are good mothers. Not all fathers are good fathers. So what does that mean then? And he said, we Jews understand this commandment to mean even broader, you shall honor age. You shall honor age. Your mothers and fathers, those who are older than you. Show honor to those who are older. When I was a boy, I was taught anybody 5 years older than you is yes, ma'am, and no, sir. Anybody 5 years older than you is yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And guess what? I'm still doing it after all these years. There aren't as many I have to yes, ma'am, and no, sir as I used to, but I'm still doing it. And every once in a while somebody will say, just call me Bill, just call me George, just call me Ruth or whatever. And I say, well, okay, I'll try to remember that. But my parents taught me I'm supposed to say yes, ma'am, or no, sir to you because you're older than I am. That's what this rabbi was saying, to honor age. Honor age. Trey was recruited right out of SMU. His degree was in economics. He was recruited by Chubb Insurance. And so he graduated on a Saturday, went to work for Chubb on Monday, and they flew him to New Jersey for special training. And Trey said that here were these young men and women they had recruited from all over the United States. They had brought in for training. And he was from Texas and then Oklahoma, but from Southern Methodist University. And at one point, he actually was introduced to the president of Chubb. And he was asked a question. He said, yes, sir, no, sir. And he said when the president was gone, other recruits were making fun of him. I couldn't believe you said yes, sir, no, sir. Well, Trey said a few months later, the president of Chubb flew into Dallas for a meeting at the Dallas office. And he was walking down the hallway speaking to one Chubb employee after another. And Trey said he came to my very small little office. He was just a few months out of college and said, "Trey Biggs, how are you doing?" And he said, I jumped to my feet and said, "I'm fine, sir. Thank you very much." And the man said, "I remember you. I remember you." And Trey said, he remembered me because I stood out from the rest of that group by saying yes, sir, and no, sir. I remember years ago when Dr. Charles Allen in Houston was playing golf every Saturday morning at River Oaks Country Club with another Methodist preacher in town, Dr. Al Freeman, and two very wealthy, powerful Methodist laymen. And these four played golf together every week. And there was another Methodist preacher in town who wanted his son, right out of college, to go to work for one of these men, and really leaned on Dr. Allen to get him an appointment with the man. And Dr. Allen said, I prevailed, and asked him, any chance you would see this young man and talk with him? And he said, sure. So the next Saturday morning, Dr. Allen said to this businessman there in Houston, how'd the interview go? He said, not well. Not well. Dr. Allen said, anything you can tell me about? And he said, when the young man came into my office, walked over and said, good morning, Frank, I wasn't going to hire him. I wasn't going to hire him. I'm not Frank to him. I'm not Frank. He had no right to call me Frank. So he didn't hire him. All right. All I'm saying is I know this is passé to many, and little children are not always taught this, but I think we've lost something. I think we've lost something. I think there is a proper respect that's due to age. That includes one's mother and father, but it also, I think, includes everybody else's mother and father, everybody else's grandmother and grandfather. That people who've lived longer, we expect to have had lots more experiences, and we can learn from them if we're willing to honor age. All right, number 13. I had a professor of ethics, Dr. Carney at Southern Methodist University, who in his ethics class used the Ten Commandments as, now that we're getting down to number 6 in verse 13. And he said, these remaining ones are about ethics. And he said, it might help you more if you think about the next 5 in a positive way. Can you take a negative statement, you shall not murder, and make it into a positive, something you shall do? Look at it and think about it for a second. You shall not murder. How can you say that in a positive way as to something you should do? Louder, Kelly. Yeah. The way he said it, very similarly, but I remember all these years later he said, you shall love life. Life is a gift of God. Everybody else's life is also a gift of God. And one human being doesn't have the right to take someone else's life. Now, you get into this big discussion, what about in times of war and so on? And we know the Israelis have to defend themselves or be taken over. They would have been chased into the sea 60 years ago if they had not defended themselves. And they believed after the Holocaust, never again, and developed an attitude, brazenly so, you hit me, I will hit you harder. If you hit me, I will hit you harder. The word in Hebrew really is not just, you shall not take somebody's life. It really does have the connotation that we have in courts of law when we differentiate between first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, and so on. It does have that distinction. So murder is the right word. That's the right translation here. Doesn't mean that one does not have the right to defend oneself. It doesn't mean one does not have the right to defend one's home, one's property, and so on. But it does mean that life is precious, really precious. You shall love life. When I read about this road rage out at Brookside last week, 2 guys in a pickup, 1 guy on a motorcycle. Now, how could you have cut each other off, made obscene gestures to each other, said something, whatever it was, that caused the motorcycle to rush to a nearby restaurant and stop, and the 2 in the pickup jump out and proceed to, start beating the thunder out of him, and he manages to get a handgun out of his vest and shoots one of them in the chest, and he dies. How was anything good going to come out of that? How was anything good going to come out of that? Isn't it amazing how quickly we forget life is precious? Everybody's life is precious. Everybody's life is a gift from God. You're supposed to honor life, love life, help preserve life. Help preserve life as far as you possibly can. We have to think and not put ourselves into those kinds of situations where anger is escalating. Last Sunday, I was sitting between my 2 grandsons at lunch, and they can't drive yet. One's 13, one's 11. But I decided to mention to them, did you hear on the news what happened over at Brookside the other night? And no, they hadn't heard. And so I didn't go into graphic detail, but I told them, I don't know what happened, but 2 guys in a pickup, 1 guy on a motorcycle, and they started, making obscene gestures perhaps at each other, and somebody yells at somebody, and the motorcycle pulls up, and the 2 guys in the pickup jump out and start to beat on him, and he shoots one of them in the chest, and he's dead. What could you learn from that? What could you learn from that? I said, the first thing is, don't ever get out of the car, Don't ever get out of the car. Nothing good's going to come from this. Gail and I were watching this America's Funny Home Videos or whatever it's called the other night just for a few minutes. And here were 2 little girls, in video, and they're getting closer and closer to each other's face. And Gail said, which one's going to hit the other first? And I said, yes. And when they're grown men or women, it doesn't take nearly that long. You can't stand there and scream in each other's face with saliva, speckling the other without somebody hitting somebody, and before you know it, it's gotten really, really bad. So this commandment is about you shall love life. We're going to have to stop there. Sorry, I took so much time on the others. We'll save number 7 for next week, chapter 20, verse 14. If you haven't been to church, don't rush off.